Just a delivery girl. Mom smirked at the mansion's guard, mocking me as a pathetic lunchbox driver. I stood frozen, swallowing the humiliation while the elites laughed. In the middle of the entrance hall, reeking of expensive perfume, my mother brandished a silver cake knife blocking the doorway. She stared at my dusty shoes with utter contempt. Where are you going? Someone ordered food and forgot the sauce. Are the customers hungry? Leaving now would be social suicide. Olivia? A mocking laugh erupted from the powerful crowd behind her. I looked at my mother, the woman of my blood, and felt a cold crack run through my chest. On the battlefield, I could shield my comrades from bullets, but here I succumbed to the cruelty of my own flesh and blood. I said nothing, only turned and walked into the silent night. 30 minutes later, I returned. This time, not through the side door. My tactical armored truck crushed the lawn, its brakes screeching the tires in front of the main hall. I kicked open the oak doors. The elite screamed. My parents insulted me, calling me a madman. And then, the doors burst open. Armed agents stormed in. The Secretary of State gasped, "Stand down!" Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really want to know the ending of this story. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let me take you back to the morning it all started. I sat on the edge of my mattress in my apartment near the base, thumbing the safety of my Sig Sauer P229. The sharp, oiled click of the slide locking into place was the only sound in the room. My name is Olivia Hill. I am 41 years old, a colonel and special operations commander in the United States Army. I have spent 15 years in classified operations, running missions that will never appear in any newspaper, protecting people who will never know my name. And the cruelest irony of my existence is this: the people who share my blood, who should know me better than anyone on this planet, have never once seen me for who I truly am. My encrypted phone sat silent on the nightstand, its screen dark, waiting for orders from a world that respected me. My civilian phone did not have the same patience. The screen lit up with a FaceTime call. My sister Chloe's name flashed across the glass. I set the Sig Sauer down on the bed, keeping it out of frame, and tapped the green button. Chloe's face filled the screen, her lip already curled, her eyes already scanning for something to attack. She zeroed in on my plain black t-shirt like it was evidence in a criminal case. Her nostrils flared. She leaned closer to the camera, her voice dripping with an authority she had never earned and did not deserve. She ordered me to dig out the faded navy polyester dress from wherever I had buried it in my closet. Her engagement party to Gerald Whitley's son was tonight at the Whitley Mansion in Chevy Chase, and she would not tolerate me showing up in anything that made her look bad in front of her billionaire in-laws. She spoke to me the way a manager speaks to a janitor who has been caught sleeping in the break room. I kept my face blank, absorbing every word the way I absorbed mission parameters during a pre-dawn briefing. No reaction, no negotiation, just data collection. But Chloe was not finished. She moved on to my vehicle, and her voice climbed to a higher register of disgust. She told me in a tone that hammered each word like a nail into a coffin lid that I was absolutely forbidden from parking my truck anywhere near the estate, 3 blocks away minimum. She wanted my Ford F-150 completely out of sight. The same vehicle that the Department of Defense had fitted with ballistic armor plating, encrypted communications equipment, and reinforced steel panels was, in my sister's estimation, nothing more than an eyesore of a hillbilly. I tightened my grip on the phone until the plastic case groaned under the pressure. The knuckles on my right hand turned white. I had the security clearance to authorize lethal force across 3 continents. Yet I sat in the dim light of my bedroom, accepting my sister's vanity rules just to maintain a fragile peace that only I was fighting to preserve. I gave her a curt nod, a single sharp dip of my chin, and ended the call. The screen went black. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the wall. I stood and walked to the kitchen counter. A letter from my mother sat propped against the coffee maker, the envelope slightly crumpled as if she had shoved it through my mail slot in a hurry. I picked it up and tore the seal open. A stack of crinkled Subway sandwich coupons spilled across the countertop, fanning out like a pathetic hand of cards. My jaw clenched hard enough to send a dull ache radiating up to my temples. I unfolded the attached sticky note, the yellow paper soft and slightly greasy between my fingers. My mother's looping, oversized handwriting stretched across the surface. I know you burn a lot of gas driving. Don't be proud. Use these. I held the note at arm's length and read it one more time, letting every word settle. My hazard pay deposits alone exceeded 6 figures annually. My long-term investment accounts, carefully managed over 15 years of deployment bonuses and combat pay, could buy her entire neighborhood, every house on the block, every car and every driveway, the corner store, the Baptist church, all of it. But my mother needed to believe I was destitute. She needed the version of me she had constructed, the broke, struggling, low-class delivery driver, to be the real one. Because if I were anything more than that, her entire worldview, her hierarchy of children with Chloe at the top and me at the bottom, would collapse. The fiction was not a mistake. It was a load-bearing wall. Pull it out, and the whole house falls. I swept the coupons off the counter and into the trash can with one flat stroke of my palm. They crinkled against the plastic liner, settling among the coffee grounds. I had returned from my last deployment with captain's bars pinned to my dress uniform, and my father had leaned against the kitchen door frame, arms crossed, and asked with a smirk if the Army provided dental benefits for box pushers. They had all invested in the same lie. I was not a decorated combat officer. I was not a special operations commander. I was a glorified delivery driver, hauling packages for minimum wage, too stubborn and too stupid to know how small my life really was. And every single one of them, my mother with her coupons, my father with his smirk, my sister with her parking rules, had repeated the lie so many times that the truth had become invisible, even to themselves. I grabbed my tactical boots from beside the door and dropped into the kitchen chair. I pulled the laces tight with sharp, decisive tugs. Each loop knotted down hard, the leather creaking as it cinched around my ankles. I made my decision sitting in that chair, surrounded by the smell of old coffee and the faint chemical trace of gun lubricant on my fingers. I would let them live inside their delusion. I would navigate their ignorance the same way I navigated hostile terrain on a classified operation. Head down, eyes open, threat assessment running on a constant, unbroken loop. The mission for tonight was simple. Get in, survive the engagement party, maintain the perimeter of peace, and extract myself without any casualties, emotional or otherwise. The wind whipped across the frozen concrete of the military airstrip, carrying the sharp chemical bite of jet fuel and the taste of metal. It was 5 a.m., still dark, the kind of pitch black that exists only on airfields before dawn, when the runway lights are the only proof that the earth has not swallowed itself. I stood rigid beside my armored command vehicle boots, locked together, spine pulled straight by 15 years of muscle memory. The cold had worked its way through my tactical gloves and into the joints of my fingers. My breath came out in short white clouds that the wind immediately tore apart. 6 Marine Guards were lined up in formation on the tarmac, their uniforms crisp, their faces locked in the hard, expressionless mask of men who understood that the next 60 seconds could determine whether they lived through the morning. These men had seen what I could do in a crisis. They had watched me coordinate extractions under fire, hold a perimeter alone, while reinforcements were 20 minutes out, and drag wounded operators to safety with rounds snapping past my ears. They did not see a delivery driver when they looked at me. They saw the officer who would bring them home alive. The armored jet taxied to a stop. The turbines whined down the high-pitched scream, dropping to a low mechanical groan. The stairs descended with a hydraulic hiss. I watched a figure appear in the doorway, backlit by the dim interior light. Secretary of State Thomas descended the stairs, flanked by 2 Secret Service agents, his overcoat flapping in the frozen wind. He reached the bottom step, met my eyes, and gave me a firm nod. The kind of nod that carries the full weight of absolute trust, the kind of acknowledgement that says, I am putting my life in your hands, and I am not afraid. I returned the salute. The 6 Marines cracked their heels against the tarmac in perfect unison, the sound ricocheting across the empty airfield like a volley of shots. Out here in the freezing dark, surrounded by armed men who had looked death in the face and chosen to stand beside me anyway, I was the absolute authority. I was the steel shield between the most powerful leaders in the country and a violent, anonymous end. 2 hours later, the mission concluded. I stood in the armory locker room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, peeling the heavy Kevlar plate carrier off my shoulders. The Velcro straps ripped apart with a sound like tearing fabric. I hung the vest in the metal cage beside my service rifle and rolled my shoulders, feeling the deep ache where the ballistic plates had pressed against my collarbone for 4 hours straight. The scent of gun oil and cold steel hung in the recycled air of the underground facility. My civilian phone vibrated against the metal bench, rattling like a trapped beetle. I picked it up. A text from my mother glowed on the screen, cheerful and oblivious. Since you have the truck, go to Costco and haul 10 cases of soda for your sister's party, saves delivery fee. I closed my eyes. I breathed in the gun oil one last time, held it in my lungs, and let it go slowly through my nose. The transition settled over my shoulders like a second vest, heavier than the Kevlar. Commander of Special Operations to pack mule-hauling soda for a party I had not been invited to attend as an equal. 120 minutes. That was all it took to cross from one world to the other. I drove the F-150 to Costco. The parking lot was packed with families loading SUVs with bulk groceries and birthday supplies. I walked through the warehouse aisles in my boots and black jacket, drawing stares from suburban shoppers who stepped aside as I passed. I loaded 10 cases of soda onto a flatbed cart, wheeled it out to the truck, and stacked every case into the armored bed by hand, one at a time. Feeling the weight of each box settle against the ballistic plating that had been designed to stop rifle rounds, not haul party supplies. Then I drove across town to Chloe's townhouse in the suburbs. I pulled the first stack of cases from the truck bed and carried them up the perfectly manicured driveway. The cardboard dug into my forearms, 50 pounds of dead weight, grinding against the same muscles that had dragged a wounded Marine across 200 yards of open ground 3 weeks earlier. My boots left faint scuff marks on the stone walkway. I kicked the front door open, stepped onto the pristine hardwood floor, and started stacking the cases beside the kitchen island. The sticky, sickeningly sweet smell of spilled soda from a cracked can filled the air, mixing with the artificial lemon scent of whatever cleaning product Chloe used to keep her floors gleaming. I had not set the last box down before my sister's voice sliced through the house from the top of the staircase, sharp and venomous, the pitch of a woman who has spent her entire life believing that volume equals authority. Chloe descended 3 steps, just enough to tower over me, and aimed a manicured finger at my feet like she was identifying a suspect in a lineup. "Don't scratch my floor. Your shoes are filthy. Walk backward out the door." She commanded, each word bitten off and spat out with precision. I froze, my hands still gripping the wet cardboard. My eyes dropped to my boots, the same boots that had crossed minefields in the dark, that had kicked down compound doors in hostile territories, that had pressed into the dirt beside dying men while I applied tourniquets under fire. In Chloe's pristine world, those boots were a contaminant, something filthy that did not deserve to touch her hardwood. I looked at her pointed finger. I looked at the floor. I looked back at her face, searching for something, anything behind the contempt. There was nothing. Just the polished surface of a woman who had never questioned her own superiority because no one had ever forced her to. I set the box down slowly, keeping my expression as blank as a concrete wall. I did not argue. I did not explain where those boots had been. I stepped backward across the threshold, one deliberate, measured step at a time, each footfall placed with the precision of a soldier retreating through a kill zone. I reached behind me, found the door handle, and pulled the door shut on her, screaming. The latch clicked, cutting her voice in half. I parked the F-150 exactly where Chloe had demanded that evening, 3 full blocks from the Whitley estate in Chevy Chase. I stepped out into the biting cold, the faded navy polyester dress clinging to my skin like a punishment I had agreed to wear. The fabric was too thin for the weather, too cheap for the crowd, and too small for the body it was supposed to disguise. I locked the truck and walked the 3 blocks in silence, my tactical boots hidden under the hem of the polyester, each step carrying me closer to a place where everything about me would be considered insufficient. The Whitley mansion blazed against the dark sky, every window pouring golden light onto the lawn like a monument to the kind of wealth that insulates people from consequences. Armed private security stood at the iron gates, 2 men in dark suits with earpieces blinking green and holstered sidearms they had probably never fired outside a range. I noted the make of the weapons, the way they held their weight on their heels instead of the balls of their feet, and the fact that neither of them checked my hands or my waistline as I passed. Amateurs. I nodded at the nearest guard and walked through into the main hall. The sensory assault was immediate. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the marble floor in 1,000 sharp angles. The air was thick with expensive cologne, the chemical sweetness of champagne, and the low, self-satisfied hum of people who believed their net worth made them superior to everyone who breathed the same air. I grabbed a glass of water from a passing waiter and pressed my back flat against the far wall. Old habit. Always face the room, always know your exits. I scanned the space the way I scanned a hostile target zone, cataloging faces, measuring distances to the exits, counting bodies. 2 service doors on the east wall. The main entrance 12 steps behind me. Approximately 90 civilians, none of them a threat, all of them a different kind of dangerous. Patricia Whitley. My sister's future mother-in-law spotted me within minutes. She separated from her circle of designer-clad friends and glided across the marble floor, her champagne flute balanced between 2 fingers like a scepter. She stopped 3 feet in front of me and performed a slow, deliberate scan, dragging her eyes from my frayed collar down to my scuffed boots, pausing at every seam, every wrinkle, every sign of the life I supposedly lived. She took a long theatrical sip of her champagne, letting the bubbles settle, letting the silence build, making sure every person within earshot was watching. Then she tilted her chin upward and spoke in a voice designed to carry. Some people are just born to live a low-class life. She stated the words rolling off her tongue like a verdict already decided. The snickers rippled outward through the group behind her. Brad, a junior partner at Chloe's law firm, a man whose biggest risk in life had been choosing the wrong golf club, leaned in from the circle. He asked loudly and with theatrical amusement whether I got to eat the leftover food from the deliveries I made. A woman beside him covered her mouth, laughing into her palm. I stared directly through Brad's forehead, locking my focus on a point on the wall 6 inches behind his skull, refusing to give him the flinch he was fishing for. My fingers tightened around the water glass. The glass was cold and smooth. I counted the exits again. 2 service doors, main entrance, 12 steps. My heartbeat stayed at 62. Resting combat rate. Then my father appeared. He shuffled across the marble floor, trailing 2 steps behind Gerald Whitley, the billionaire patriarch, like a dog walking at heel. Gerald moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who owned everything his eyes landed on. My father followed in his wake, smaller, shrunken, his shoulders rounded inward, his head bobbing in agreement with whatever Gerald had just said. They stopped in front of me. My father positioned himself beside the billionaire, not between Gerald and me, not in front of me, but beside Gerald, aligning himself with power instead of blood. I looked at my dad, the man who taught me to ride a bicycle, the man who was supposed to stand between his daughter and the wolves. He avoided my eyes. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, a thin, reedy sound, the kind of noise a man makes when he has already sold something he cannot buy back and is hoping no one noticed the transaction. He lifted his drink and pointed it toward me, the amber liquid sloshing over the rim and spotting his sleeve. She's stubborn, likes the lowly labor weathering the sun and dew. Her own fault. My dad announced, his voice rising so Gerald could hear every syllable, offering my dignity as a gift, a handshake, a down payment on a relationship with a billionaire that would never include him as an equal. The betrayal did not hit like a bullet. Bullets are clean. They enter, they exit, and the body knows how to process the damage. This was different. This was a deep, spreading pressure that started behind my sternum and radiated outward through my ribs, filling my chest cavity with something heavy and cold like concrete being poured into a mold that was still breathing. I watched my father grin at Gerald Whitley, the grin of a man who has just handed over something precious and is waiting for his reward. I watched him shrink himself even smaller to fit inside the billionaire's shadow, his shoulders rounding further, his chin dipping, making himself physically subordinate. I watched him barter away the last shred of the fatherhood I had spent 41 years hoping existed somewhere beneath the nervous laughs and the absent stares and the casual cruelty that I had always excused as ignorance. It was not ignorance, It was a choice. He had chosen his side, and he had chosen it in public in front of witnesses in a room full of strangers who would remember this moment and never know the weight of what had just been sold. I locked my jaw. I kept my face frozen. My hands stayed pinned flat against my thighs, fingers pressed hard against the polyester. I counted my breaths the way I counted them in a firefight, crouched behind cover while rounds snapped overhead. In through the nose, 2 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. Maintain position. Do not engage. Gerald Whitley absorbed my father's offering and expanded with it. He puffed his chest out, emboldened, stepping forward into my personal space until I could smell the bourbon on his breath and the heavy cedar of his cologne. He reached out with one thick hand and patted my shoulder, slow and heavy, the way you pat a stray animal you have decided not to adopt. The weight of his palm pressed down on my collarbone, proprietary and dismissive, the touch of a man who genuinely believed that his tax bracket made him a different species. Society needs lowly manual laborers like you to serve us. Gerald boomed, his voice filling the space around us, his head swiveling to scan the room for the applause he expected and received. Polite tinkling laughter from the silk and diamond crowd. A few raised glasses. I looked down at his heavy hand on my shoulder. I felt the weight of it pressing against the same spot where my Kevlar plate carrier sat during operations. The same collarbone that had absorbed the recoil of 1,000 rounds, fired in defense of people like him. People who would never know my name, never know what I had sacrificed, never understand that their freedom to stand in this chandelier-lit room and mock a stranger was purchased with the blood and silence of soldiers they would cross the street to avoid. Every muscle in my arm screamed to move. I visualized the P229 locked in the glove box of my truck 3 blocks away, cold and patient. I forced my hands flat, pressing them harder against my thighs, pinning them down. The humiliation was still thick in the air, still settling into my skin like smoke, when the encrypted phone strapped to my inner thigh delivered a violent, sustained vibration. The pattern was unmistakable. 3 long pulses, 2 short. Code red. I turned away from Gerald mid-sentence, not caring that his hand slid off my shoulder, not caring about the offended gasp from Patricia behind me. I pulled the device from the concealed pocket sewn into the lining of the polyester dress. The screen flashed the coordinates and situation report in compressed, tactical shorthand. Secretary of State Thomas's motorcade had been ambushed less than 2 miles from this very mansion. The Secret Service protective detail was pinned down by hostile fire in a kill zone on the main road. Casualties were reported. I was the closest combat-ready unit on the operational grid. The champagne chatter, the laughter, the clinking crystal, the string quartet playing something soft and expensive in the corner, all of it vanished from my ears as if someone had ripped the plug from a speaker. The domestic noise of the party collapsed into absolute silence, replaced by the cold, calculated focus that 15 years of combat command had welded permanently into my nervous system. The civilian rage that had been boiling in my chest for the past 2 hours, the coupons, the backward retreat, the 3-block walk, my father selling my dignity for a handshake, all of it was instantly crushed flat, compressed into a dense, burning core of pure operational clarity. I dropped my water glass on a passing waiter's tray without looking. I calculated the distance to my truck. 3 blocks. 4 minutes at a sprint. I mapped the fastest route to the ambush coordinates on a mental grid. I turned and moved toward the main double doors with heavy, purposeful strides, my boots striking the marble with the steady rhythm of a countdown that had already begun. Chloe's voice shrieked my name from the center of the ballroom, a sound designed to humiliate and control. I did not slow down. I did not turn around. I reached the foyer in 8 strides. My mother was already there. She had positioned herself directly in front of the double doors, planting her body in the exit like a human barricade. The silver cake knife she had been carrying for the ceremony was raised in her right hand, the flat edge of the blade pointed toward my chest, blocking my path. Her eyes were wild, furious, and utterly, completely blind to the emergency screaming through the phone pressed against my thigh. She spewed her venom, her words tumbling over each other in a cascade of contempt. She mocked my hungry customers. She demanded I stay for the family photographs. She said leaving now would be the final proof that I was nothing but an ungrateful, low-class embarrassment. She gripped the silver cake knife like a scepter. Like that thin piece of ceremonial metal gave her dominion over my choices, my duty, and my life. 2 miles away, the Secretary of State was bleeding in the back of a destroyed SUV. The Secret Service agents protecting him were running low on ammunition. And my mother was blocking the door with a cake knife because she cared more about a photo opportunity than the terror she could not see in her daughter's eyes. I looked deep into my mother's face. I searched for recognition for the flicker of a parent who might for one single second wonder why her daughter's pupils were dilated, why her breathing had changed, why the muscles in her jaw had locked into a formation that had nothing to do with family drama. My mother stared back at me, and all I saw was the reflection of the woman she had decided I was. 41 years of looking directly at me and seeing a stranger she had invented. I leaned in close, so close I could see the mascara clumping in the corners of her lashes, so close I could smell the champagne on her breath. The edge of the silver blade hovered an inch from my collarbone. My voice dropped to a freezing, dead calm, the tone I used to issue orders that determined whether men lived or died. "That's right, Mom," I said. "The client is very hungry." I shoved her arm aside with a flat palm, the cake knife swinging wide. I pushed through the heavy doors with both hands, the cold night air slamming into my face. Behind me, my mother's curses chased me down the marble steps, bouncing off the columns and dying somewhere in the dark between the estate and the street. I sprinted the 3 blocks in the dark. My boots hammered the pavement in a steady 4-count rhythm. The cheap polyester dress flapped against my legs, the hem tearing on the rough sidewalk. I reached the F-150, ripped open the driver's door, and threw myself into the seat. The familiar scent of stale coffee and gun oil flooded my lungs, replacing the perfume and champagne with something real. I reached behind the seat with my right hand, grabbed the heavy Kevlar tactical vest by its shoulder strap, and dragged it forward across the center console. I threw it over my head, right over the polyester dress, and yanked the straps tight until the ballistic plates pressed flat and hard against my ribs. The weight of the armor settled over my shoulders, and the woman in the cheap dress disappeared. I pulled the P229 from the glove box, racked the slide to chamber around, the metallic snap echoing in the cab, and holstered it on my thigh. I slammed my palm against the hidden switch under the dashboard. The emergency sirens screamed to life, red and blue lights exploding across the quiet suburban street. The massive V8 engine roared as I floored the accelerator, burning rubber off the curb. The armored truck launched forward, tearing through the manicured neighborhood, the flashing lights strobing off the dark windows of sleeping houses. Up ahead, thick black smoke billowed into the night sky, lit from below by the orange glow of burning vehicles. The sharp, rhythmic crack of automatic gunfire echoed off the concrete buildings, growing louder with every block I closed. I slammed the brakes hard, sliding the armored truck sideways to block the intersection. The tires screamed against the asphalt. A panicked local police officer spun around from behind his cruiser, his face white, his service weapon aimed directly at my windshield. He screamed at me to get back, his voice cracking. I kicked my door open and stepped out directly into his line of fire without a flinch, without breaking stride. I held my commander's badge high in my left hand, the metal catching the red and blue flashing lights. My voice cut through the chaos of sirens and gunfire like a blade. U.S. military establish a 100-yard perimeter. Push back civilians, disobey, immediate arrest. The words came out with the absolute, unchallengeable authority of a battlefield executioner. The cop's mouth snapped shut. His weapon dropped. He turned and ran to obey. I moved tactically toward the pinned convoy, weapon raised, scanning the smoke and the flickering shadows for hostile movement. The lead Secret Service agent was crouched behind the shattered door of an armored SUV, blood streaming from a graze across his forehead. His suit jacket ripped open, his tie hanging by a thread. He looked up through the smoke, saw my face, and his entire body sagged with a relief so profound it looked like a man being pulled from water. "Colonel, thank God," he shouted over the roar of gunfire and the wailing of sirens. I did not smile. I did not offer comfort. I grabbed him by the tactical harness on his shoulder, hauled him to his feet, and pointed toward my armored truck idling at the intersection behind us. I had spent my whole life swallowing their insults to keep the peace, but holding that badge in the smoke, I realized I owed them nothing. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family to find your own strength, please hit the like button and share your experience in the comments. We are never as alone as they want us to believe. I grabbed Secretary of State Thomas by the collar of his ruined suit and pulled him from behind the destroyed SUV. His face was ghost white, streaked with ash and sweat. His eyes wide but focused, the eyes of a man who had accepted the possibility of dying in the last 10 minutes and was now processing the fact that he might survive. I positioned my Kevlar-clad body directly between him and the line of fire, using my torso as a physical shield. We moved in a coordinated rush through the smoke, low and fast, my left hand locked on his collar, my right hand sweeping the P229 in controlled arcs ahead of us. Bullets sparked off the asphalt at our heels, sending chips of pavement spraying against my boots and shins. A round punched through the air close enough to feel the heat on my ear. I shoved the secretary into the reinforced rear cabin of the F-150, pushing him down onto the armored seat, and slammed the heavy steel door shut. The lock engaged with a deep, metallic clunk. A round spider webbed the ballistic glass 6 inches above my head as I ducked around the rear panel. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the truck into drive. The tires screamed as the F-150 lurched forward. The encrypted communications equipment on the dashboard was alive with chatter, multiple voices overlapping, reporting blocked highways and compromised routes. The main roads to the military base were cut off by the ambush perimeter. I gripped the steering wheel, running the tactical map in my head, eliminating options one by one. I needed a fortress, high walls, heavy gates, absolute privacy. And it needed to be inside the current police cordon, close enough to reach before the hostile forces could redeploy and cut me off. My personal phone lit up on the dashboard. Mount the bright screen, slashing through the darkness of the cab like a blade. A text from Chloe. The words glowed against the black interior, each letter crisp and deliberate, typed from manicured thumbs, in the safety of a billionaire's living room while I bled in the smoke 2 miles away. You are the shame of this family. Don't show your face again. A round punched into the side panel of the truck, the impact ringing through the steel chassis like a hammer striking a church bell. The vibration traveled through the frame and into the steering wheel, humming against my palms. I stared at the 10 words on the phone screen for exactly 1 second. The digital cruelty of the text pressing against the physical violence of the bullets. 2 wars happening simultaneously in the blue-white glow of a 5-inch screen. My sister was disowning me via text message while I was taking fire to protect a man whose name she would see on the evening news and never connect to the sister she had just erased. I locked the screen with my thumb, plunging the cab back into darkness. My mind worked through the tactical map with the mechanical precision of a targeting computer. Every route north was compromised. Every route west ran through the active kill zone. South looped back into the ambush perimeter. I needed a fortified structure within 3 miles, heavy gates, high walls, and enough isolation to establish a defensible position until reinforcements arrived. I looked in the rearview mirror. Secretary of State Thomas sat in the reinforced rear cabin, gripping the armored door handle, his torn suit covered in ash and blood, his breathing ragged but controlled. I met his terrified eyes in the narrow strip of reflected light. My voice came out flat, completely devoid of emotion, cold and sharp as a scalpel making its first incision. Sir, my sister's in-laws, the Whitley estate, it's the only safe house within 3 miles. The secretary nodded once, a short, sharp movement. I gripped the steering wheel and banked the heavy truck hard to the right, the tires biting into the asphalt, the suspension groaning under the weight of the armored plating. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, the V8 engine roaring beneath me, driving at full speed straight back toward the mansion I had fled an hour ago. Straight back toward the people who had spent the evening calling me a delivery girl. Straight back toward hell. The F-150 roared down the pristine street of Chevy Chase like a steel battering ram. I did not ease off the gas. I did not signal. I did not tap the brakes. The massive reinforced front bumper slammed directly into the Whitley estate's locked iron gates at speed. The metal shrieked like a living thing, buckled at the center, and snapped off its hinges. The gates flew inward, clanging across the cobblestone. I drove the heavy truck straight over the billion-dollar manicured lawn, the wide aggressive tires shredding deep, muddy trenches through the perfect grass, crushing landscape lights, and tearing through flower beds. The earth churned beneath the chassis. I slammed the brakes and burned rubber, locking the truck into a diagonal defensive position across the front of their fleet of luxury vehicles, blocking every single exit from the property. I did not go around to the side door this time. I did not walk with my head down wearing a cheap dress trying to be invisible. I climbed out of the cab, the cold air hitting the Kevlar vest strapped over the polyester, and walked straight up the marble steps. The same steps I had descended an hour earlier with my mother's curses at my back and the laughter of billionaires in my ears. I stopped in front of the solid oak double doors, planted my tactical boot against the center seam, and delivered a single, devastating kick. The doors exploded inward, both panels slamming against the foyer walls with a concussive boom that rattled the chandelier above. Plaster dust drifted from the ceiling. I stepped into the blinding chandelier light. My P229 drawn at low ready, the muzzle pointed at the marble floor. My tactical earpiece glowed blue against my jaw. The heavy Kevlar vest was strapped tight over the same cheap polyester dress they had ridiculed me in 45 minutes ago. I stood in the center of the shattered doorframe, framed by the twisted remains of the oak panels, and the room froze. The string quartet stopped mid-note. Champagne flutes hovered motionless halfway to open mouths. For one suspended second, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then the screaming started. Chloe stormed forward from the center of the ballroom, her face twisted in pure, unfiltered rage. She did not see the gun in my hand. She did not see the Kevlar. She did not register the tactical earpiece, the body armor, or the flashing emergency lights reflecting off the foyer walls behind me. She saw what she had always seen. Her disobedient, low-class sister who had ruined her party embarrassed her in front of her billionaire in-laws and failed to bring the soda receipt. Nothing, not a drawn weapon, not shattered doors, not an armored military vehicle parked on the lawn could override the fiction she had spent her entire life building. "You bitch! Did you forget the soda receipt?" she shrieked, her voice cracking, her manicured finger jabbing toward my face. Gerald Whitley turned purple behind the bar, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany. He screamed for his private security team to arrest me for trespassing and property destruction. His wife, Patricia, pressed herself flat against the far wall, her champagne flute shaking violently in her hand, the bubbles sloshing over the rim. My father stepped out from the crowd, his face contorted into an expression I had never seen before. Something between rage and terror. A trembling finger pointed directly between my eyes. "Just because you deliver food, you're insanely jealous of your sister." He roared, the veins in his neck standing out like cords, spit gathering at the corners of his mouth. I did not blink. I did not lower my weapon. I did not waste a single breath responding to any of them. I looked right through my father as if he were made of glass, as if he had already ceased to exist in any version of reality that mattered to me. I pressed the transmission button on the radio unit strapped to my left shoulder, and my voice cut through their pathetic screaming like cracked ice slicing through dead water. "Principal is entering the building," I commanded. Before my father could draw another breath, the foyer filled with bodies. The tactical QRF team I had summoned en route poured through the shattered doorframe in a tactical flood, fanning out across the marble floor with assault rifles raised, red laser sights painting dots on the walls and ceiling. The arrogant lawyers dropped to the floor screaming. The billionaire wives crawled under tables, their designer gowns tangling around their knees. Brad, the junior partner who had joked about my leftover food, pressed his face to the cold marble, his hands clasped behind his head, whimpering. Gerald Whitley's private security guards assessed the situation in approximately 2 seconds, dropped their weapons, and joined the civilians on the floor. Nobody in that room had ever been on the wrong end of a tactical entry before. The shock was total. And then from behind the wall of agents, Secretary of State Thomas walked into the lobby of the Whitley mansion. He moved through the shattered doorframe, slowly, deliberately, each step measured with the weight of a man who had stared at his own death 30 minutes ago and decided he was not finished. His expensive suit was ripped at the shoulder, the fabric scorched black in patches where the fire from the ambush had licked too close. Ash covered his lapels and the front of his shirt. Blood had dried in a dark, jagged streak from his left temple to his jaw, the wound still raw and glistening at the edges. Sweat had plastered his gray hair to his forehead in dark, uneven streaks. His tie was gone. His shirt collar was torn open. He smelled of smoke and cordite and the sharp chemical tang of the fire suppressant that had been deployed inside the destroyed SUV. But his spine was iron straight, his chin was level, and his eyes carried the unmistakable, crushing gravity of the second most powerful person in the United States government. His presence hit the room like a pressure change, compressing the air, bending every gaze toward him, silencing the last whimper from the crowd on the floor. Gerald Whitley looked up from the floor. The transformation was instantaneous. The confident, purple-faced billionaire who had patted my shoulder and lectured me about the servant class 30 minutes ago went white. The color drained from his face in real time, the arrogant flush bleeding out into a sickly, trembling pallor as recognition hit him like a physical blow. Every American with a television knew that face. The crystal wine glass he had been clutching slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sound cut through the stunned silence like a pistol shot, and nobody flinched because there were already enough real guns in the room. My mother was on her knees near the staircase, her expensive dress crumpled beneath her. Her eyes darted frantically between my Kevlar vest, the assault rifles, the armed agents in tactical formation, and the ash-covered man standing in the center of her future in-law's demolished foyer. Her mouth opened and closed twice before any sound escaped. She raised a trembling hand and pointed at me, her finger shaking like a branch in a storm. She's just your private driver, right? She managed the words, coming out cracked and desperate, her voice climbing to a register I'd never heard, clinging to the last fraying thread of the lie she had built her entire identity around, trying to hold the fiction together, even as it disintegrated in front of 90 witnesses. Secretary Thomas stopped dead in the center of the foyer. He turned his head slowly, a precise, deliberate rotation, and looked down at my mother, kneeling on the marble floor. The expression that crossed his face was not anger. It was not surprise. It was pure, undiluted contempt, the kind of contempt a man who has just survived an assassination attempt reserves for ignorance so profound it borders on the obscene. His voice boomed through the silent room, powered by the raw authority of his office and the visceral disgust of a man who had just watched the woman who saved his life be described as a delivery driver. Driver Colonel Olivia Hill is our best special ops commander. She is the reason I am alive tonight. The word struck the room like an artillery shell, detonating at ground zero. The shock wave was visible. I watched it travel across the faces of every person in that foyer. Chloe's composure shattered. Her jaw dropped open, the carefully constructed mask of superiority crumbling into something raw, exposed, and horrified. Gerald Whitley pressed his forehead to the cold marble, his massive shoulders shaking. Patricia Whitley slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her designer gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. My father's trembling finger, the same finger that had pointed at me to sell my dignity to a billionaire, dropped to his side and hung limp and useless. The 15-year secret ripped open and bled across the marble floor under the chandelier light. My family turned to stone. The same people who had mocked my boots, banned my truck, sold my dignity for a nod from a billionaire, sent me subway coupons, ordered me to walk backward out of a townhouse, and blocked my exit with a cake knife were now on their knees, surrounded by federal agents with assault rifles staring up at the woman they had never bothered to see. The fiction they had built, the broke, stubborn, low-class delivery driver who was too stupid to know how small her life was, lay in pieces on the marble like the shattered wine glass beside Gerald Whitley's trembling hand. My mother began to sob. The sound was wet and ragged, stripped of every layer of composure she had weaponized against me for 4 decades. She crawled forward across the cold marble on her hands and knees, reaching for me, her fingers grasping at the empty air near my boots, her face streaked with mascara and tears. "I just wanted you safe," she cried out, her voice breaking into a high, desperate wail that echoed off the marble walls. It was a frantic, last-ditch attempt to rewrite 41 years of contempt, neglect, and cruelty into a single sentence of maternal concern. A rewrite so pathetic, so transparently false that it hung in the air like smoke and dissolved just as fast. I looked down at her, tears pooling on the cold marble floor. I searched inside myself the way you search a cleared room after a firefight, sweeping every corner, checking every shadow, looking for anything that might still be alive. I searched for sympathy, for a tremor of the old loyalty that had kept me silent for 15 years. For the conditioned reflex that had made me swallow my father's insults and lace my boots and walk backward out of my sister's house and park 3 blocks away and wear a dress I hated to a party where I was the entertainment. I felt absolutely nothing. The room was cleared. The corners were empty. My mother's hand shot out and grabbed the toe of my boot, her fingers locking around the leather with the desperate grip of someone who feels the ground opening beneath them. She begged me to stay. She begged for 1 minute to explain. She begged with a voice that belonged to a woman who had just realized far too late that the person she had spent decades diminishing was the most powerful person in the room. I stepped back. 1 clean, measured step. The leather slid from her fingers and her hands dropped to the cold marble. The contact severed. I did not yell. I did not deliver a speech about the coupons, the backward retreat, the parking rules, the cake knife, or the years of silence. I looked at my mother on the floor, then at Chloe mascara running in black streaks down her face, her body trembling. Then at my father still frozen on his knees, his mouth open, the accusatory finger now hanging dead at his side. They had chosen the lie. They had built their superiority on my silence, fed it with my obedience, decorated it with my humiliation. Now they had to sit in the wreckage of it, surrounded by armed men, while the delivery girl they had invented stood above them in full military authority. I holstered my weapon. I turned my back on the entire room. The Secret Service agents shifted boots, scraping against the marble, creating a clear path through the shattered doorway. I walked between them without a word, my boots crunching on the broken oak, stepping over the twisted iron hinges and the plaster dust. I did not look back at my mother sobbing on the floor. I did not look at my father. I did not look at Chloe or Gerald or Patricia or Brad or any of the silk-wrapped strangers who had laughed at my boots and asked about my leftovers. They were no longer my squad. They were no longer my mission. They were no longer my responsibility. They were just civilians caught outside the wire, standing in the wreckage of a perimeter they never should have tested. I climbed back into the driver's seat of the F-150 and reached for the heavy armored door. I paused for half a second with my hand on the cold steel handle, feeling the weight of it, feeling the finality of what closing this door would mean. Then I pulled it shut. The steel met the frame with a deep, resonant thud, the sound of a vault sealing the sound of a perimeter locking into place for the last time. Every noise from the mansion, the sobbing, the agent chatter, the crunch of boots on broken wood, the distant wailing of my mother's voice, calling a name that no longer belonged to the woman sitting in this cab, all of it vanished, cut clean, sealed out. The silence inside the cab was total and absolute, pressing against my eardrums, like deep water, like the silence at the bottom of an ocean trench where no human voice has ever reached. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, feeling the faint vibration of the idling engine traveling through the leather wrapping and into my palms. My heartbeat was steady, 60 beats per minute. The Kevlar vest pressed against my ribs with each slow, measured breath. The cheap polyester dress underneath it was damp with sweat and stiff where the smoke had settled into the fibers. I could still smell the cordite in my hair, still feel the phantom heat of the round that had passed close enough to warm my ear. My civilian phone lit up on the center console. The screen glowed in the dark cab, casting a pale blue rectangle across the dashboard. Not a text from Chloe, not a voicemail from my mother. It was an automated notification from the Department of Defense, a clean official deposit confirmation displayed in the standard government format. A sharp digital ping echoed through the silent cab, bouncing off the armored panels. $15,000 of hazard pay had just cleared into my account. Money earned in blood and smoke, in the bone-rattling impact of rounds striking the armor that protected the most important person I had ever been assigned to shield. The ultimate undeniable government-certified proof of my worth, deposited into a bank account my family never knew existed. I pushed the phone aside, face down on the passenger seat. The screen went dark. I reached up to the center of the dashboard and turned the radio dial with 2 fingers. The cab filled with the opening notes of My Way, the melody rolling through the speakers, low and steady, settling into the silence like a quiet declaration that needed no audience. I wrapped my hand around the gear shift and pulled it into drive. The engine rumbled beneath me, a low, heavy vibration that traveled up through the floorboards and into my boots, the same boots Chloe had called filthy, the same boots that had crossed a minefield, kicked down a compound door, and carried me through smoke and gunfire to save the Secretary of State. I released the parking brake. The truck rolled forward, tires pressing slowly over the shredded lawn, crunching through the ruined flower beds, passing through the mangled gates, and onto the dark suburban street. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me worth seeing. I pressed the gas pedal down steady and deliberate, and the V8 carried me forward into the dark. The road ahead was empty. The road ahead was quiet. The road ahead was mine. Blood does not make a family, respect does, and I finally learned to stop bleeding for people who only wanted to watch me scar. Please like this video, subscribe for more true stories, and drop a comment below if you have also walked away to build your own empire. The lonely road is always the one that leads to freedom.